Coaching as Benevolence, a podcast for people who are curious about using coaching for self-development. I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings Grief and Loss Coaching.
And I'm LaShawn with Michelle Sage Place Positive Intelligence Coaching.
So we are in the ACT section of our guided journal, picking up from where we left off last week. We are now on the 7th prompt within that section. It is the last one of the section, which really wraps up all of the structured content of this guided journal. So really interesting to see how we process and feel into this prompt today in relationship to the rest of what we've talked about over the course of many weeks now, as we've gone prompt by prompt through our journal, Coaching Nuggets of Wisdom to Inspire, Explore, Act, Flourish, a guided journal to live your best life. So I'm just going to go ahead and read prompt 7 within the section of Act, and then we will go from there. Be okay with and be a bit bold about trying something a little bit different. What if this moment invites you to try something new, something just a little outside of your comfort zone? Feel into the edge of your familiar rhythm. What calls to you from just beyond it? Reflect on how courage can be quiet, playful, and sacred. Where are you ready to experiment? This prompt, reading it for me, really evoked within me some peacefulness and some grounding. So I think that is one positive element of this prompt, because sometimes when we think about outside of our comfort zone or taking action, that can feel the opposite of grounded, or it can feel not so soothing. But I really like how this is worded. I mean, even just reading this aloud felt like a therapy moment for myself. So I want to start at the beginning of the prompt where it says, be okay with and be a bit bold about trying something a little bit different or differently. So trying something a little bit different and not the same as always is a tall ask in a lot of ways, in that we can often get into our day where we do things en route or do things very similarly without much mindfulness and without considering something that might be a little bit different or a bit bold and a little bit new for us. And so I like that as a call to action, as a way to start journaling here on this prompt, to really think about in one's day. Maybe it was just even thinking about one's day today or their day yesterday. What came up where maybe they noticed a thought, or maybe they did something, and then journal about that and how that could have maybe looked a little bit different. And then that can be applied to the next day and the next day, et cetera, moving forward. And for me, I think this is mostly around mindset shifts that lead to action and doing things differently. So I went on a hike on yesterday with my father-in-law and with my daughter. And, I didn't know what I was going to get myself into, right? Having my child with me, I wasn't sure how far she could go, and wasn't, wasn't even sure how far I would go. And so on that hike, I started to consider what I could do a little bit differently as I started to kind of go down the path only thinking about all the things that I was needing to process, I guess. And I think there's a part of that processing when you're walking where your thoughts will just start to go, and that's okay. And that's a way to process them. But I think for me, what I did a little bit differently in that moment was recognizing that I was really, out in nature, and I was thinking about things that were just not really in line with nature in a lot of ways. And so it was a gentle reminder and a gentle shift in my own thinking to just refocus on the visual surroundings and what that looked like up close. And it really became kind of more of something bigger because, my daughter is already doing that, right? And so that might have also been what was part of my own mindset shift as well. But I think that doing that differently led to the hike being much more fulfilling than if I would have continued on the path of how I'd started the hike, where I was more just in my head and not as maybe interactive and not noticing the beauty and the inspiration and the awe of what could be seen, even in a simple rock. right? Or even in the dirt or whatever it may be. And so that is one example more recently as of, yesterday that really comes to mind for this. It comes to mind for me in this prompt. So LaShawn, this is the last prompt of this section on action, and then really the last of these 3 structured sections. What's coming up for you?
Well, I like that you mentioned the experience that you had when you went on the hike and how you kind of pivoted and went from like an internal looking at things from a cerebral point of view, or like in your mind, and you shifted to the present, to what you were looking at, to being more engaged with the environment. And that made me think about the question in the second part of, or the second line of the prompt, which is, what if this moment invites you to try something new, something just a little outside of your comfort zone? So I thought that was a really, that you accepted the invitation to try something new, to do something different, and it enriched your experience. So I really liked the story that you told. And one of the things that's coming up for me when you read the prompt, I agree with you. It's almost therapeutic, the way that it's phrased. It made me think about my own tendency to be risk averse, or my own tendency to not want to step out of routine and not do something that's unpredictable. I actually have been given an opportunity, and it will take me away from my work for 2 days. And I looked at my calendar and I'm like, well, on paper, on the calendar, there's nothing there, but it's really close to, our big fundraising event. But it would be really good, just a great experience, and it will strengthen my leadership and my ability to organize and to manage others. And so I was thinking about all the pros and cons, but the one thing that I was really struggling with was just the fact that it's different. Doing something different, like leaving in the middle of what would be a regular work week. There was no special day. It's not a break. It's not in between programs. So there's that fear of doing something different. But then this prompt gave me a little push. It's like, hey, why not just make the decision to go and do this thing and make it work? Why do you have to think about all the things that could go wrong when you're gone for 2 days, and just say, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm going to be gone these 2 days. I have plenty of time to prepare my team, to prepare everyone so that they know it's not like it's last minute. It's not like I'm leaving tomorrow. This prompt encouraged me to do that, to just do something different. And I want to go back to that question. What if this moment invites you to try something new, something just a little outside of your comfort zone? Well, I would say this is big. This is not just a little outside my comfort zone. This is really outside my comfort zone. But this invites the question, what if you don't? And if I don't, and I just do, status quo, I say, no, I can't do it because X, Y, Z. I mean, there's a million excuses why not. What could I be missing? What growth could I be missing out of? How can this change my team? How can this change just the culture around expectations of the role of the executive director, and stepping out of the organization and doing something else that will be good for the organization, good for me? That could really give everybody an opportunity to try things differently, to maybe step up to the plate, or to see what happens when I'm absent. So in thinking about that and thinking about that decision, I felt excited. And I'm like, well, how cool would it be to go and do this trip? And it's a gift, all expense paid. And what does that say about me and how the person who's extended this invitation to me, what does that say about their thinking about me and my value and what I can contribute, that they're willing to give me this spot? And how would that look if I were to say, no, I can't do it? But I've really committed to this new part of my life. And I've talked about it a little bit in podcast episodes. I'm really getting into broad-based organizing. I find a lot of value in it. And I think it would be really great for the Family Learning Center. And I'm thinking long-term. I'm thinking getting things ready, and making sure that organizations, not just the Family Learnings, but other organizations have power to defend or stand up for the things that are important, and how important broad-based organizing is. And I've really gotten into it. And so this is yet another opportunity to deepen that and to delve deeply into that. And given this opportunity, my first thing was, yeah, I really want to do it. It was like an instant yes. And then there was wait a minute, this is different. Oh, wait a minute, how am I going to justify this? And so this prompt really encouraged me and inspired me to just do it. Well, how about you? What's coming up for you, Eryn?
I am just intrigued by the enthusiasm in your voice about this opportunity, and almost like this sense of freedom and reading this prompt that gives you, like, it's almost like a sense of permission in a way to capitalize on this opportunity when deep down it's something that you already hold the keys to, right? Like, you were invited to this, you have the skills, like all of those things. So it's just a little bit of that, like, calling or prompting to try something a little differently. And I know you said this might feel like a lot different or bigger than just a little, but I don't know, because you are already thinking through all of the details, right? And you're already getting prepared, like thinking through everything you'd have to have prepared. And, so you still have that sense of responsibility that makes you such a good leader, right? So you're holding both. And then this is just that little push, like you said, that kind of helps you make that choice on whether to take this opportunity or not. And just the enthusiasm, as I'm in your voice about this, to me, it sounds like it's a yes, right? Like,
right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really exciting. And I can't wait to hear more. And I think experiences like that really do shape us and help push us into new ways of leading or doing or thinking. And that sounds really exciting in that way. So I think that ties then into that last half of the prompt, because it says, feeling into the edge of your familiar rhythm, which is what you felt into. You didn't ignore it. You're like, no, I need to make sure this responsibility is taken care of, and this could be an opportunity for someone to step up here, etc. What calls to you from just beyond it? And I could hear that call in your response in your voice. And then the second question here I want to get to is one that really stood out to me with the wording of the 3 items listed in the prompt. So it says, reflect on how courage can be quiet, playful, and sacred. Where are you ready to experiment? But I want to look at those 3: quiet, playful, and sacred. Because courage, to me, when I think of the word courage, it's more maybe about taking action in a way that feels aligned with our values. It may be challenging and push us outside of our comfort zone a bit, like the rest of the prompt has already talked about. But I don't necessarily always get that connection, that it can be a quiet thing, like on a hike, right? Or it can be playful. And playful and courage were never part of the same sentence when I was growing up. Like, that was never even, like, those belonged in opposite ends, right? So considering that juxtaposition and how that relates to courage, the playful piece, I think, is really cool. And then sacred, and what that looks like in our own becoming, in our own courageous journeys, where I've been on this thing lately where I keep hearing or keep wanting to listen more, because I'll notice somebody told me something, and the moment they told me that, I was meant to hear it really well, and the timing of it was really good, and I need to follow through with being curious about that and courageous about that. And maybe that requires being quiet for a bit and being playful for a bit, and really taking myself through that sacred journey of, what is this telling me? And I think that is really beautiful. And this is coming up too in my personal life, as I'm considering, there's an office space that is a potential opportunity for me, for my individual people that I love, my individual. I don't know why I said people, but it's fine. But just sitting with that and really listening to what is the courageous choice here? Because I could make a choice out of fear, and we talk about fear a lot, and fear shows up a lot in this journal. And our goal for our journalers is to get to a point where fear is might be a little bit of a quieter voice. It's not the loudest voice in the room. And courage is louder than fear. And playfulness and being quiet and listening and holding that space. I think those all really stand out to me as I navigate this journey of this next chapter, because I'm trying to consider what this next chapter really looks like for the work that I do in the grief space, and how I can serve more people and make that, just more available. So it's definitely a part of conversations I've been starting to have. And I think the other piece to this too, in taking action, since this section is about action or act, is it's one thing to have the conversations of listen and be playful, but the next step is really, okay, I'll take the action. I'll take that leap of faith, and I could fall flat on my face. I could rise above everything else. It could be very mundane and it's not even that big, or there's no shift at all, but I still can take the next step and show up and have responsibility for taking that next step. And I think even in just doing that, that's where courage lies. And that's where we learn something new. Even if the conference that you go to is a bust, or even like taking that step, right? You already are learning something new, which is so cool to me. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for the people to reflect on that and write about that in the journal prompt, and how what newness might be showing up for them in relationship to these terms related to courage.
I love that you brought up, I love how you mentioned the word courage. And when you were talking about courage and you read the phrase, reflect on how courage can be quiet, playful, and sacred, I thought about Brené Brown and how she talks about courage and the French origins of that word, and how the base of that word, the core of that word, is heart, which is corps in French. And so I really thought about the heart space, and of course, from heart, I thought about love. And because love is the opposite of fear, I thought about how love, you go towards something, you're thrilled, excited, there's no judgment, there's curiosity. Whereas with fear, you're running away from something. Usually you're avoiding pain. Often fear causes you to lock up and not, and maybe close down rather than open up. So those are some things that I was thinking about while you were talking about courage and how that shows up. I love the words quiet, playful, and sacred, just like you were looking at those different words. And I would say that in itself, looking at courage as quiet, playful, and sacred, that in itself is a bit bold and a little bit different. So I love that part of it. That's even the wording in this prompt is very close to being bold, being different, looking at courage differently. Well, I usually look at courage as something like, strength. I think of strength. I think of forging into battle, facing your demons, that kind of thing. But I rarely think of courage as quiet, playful, and sacred. And I love that it lends itself to a different lens to look at courage and to look at trying something new and different. What's coming up for you, Eryn?
I think the concept that you brought in around love is so meaningful to me, and so uplifting in a lot of ways. And I always am like, when people talk about love, or, it comes up a lot, it's like, well, what does that really mean? And what does that mean in action, and all those questions. But I do think at the most basic level, like if we all acted out of love, things would look different, and we would act more courageously, would be my guess. Mm-hmm. So just the freedom and tying love back into that word next to courage really resonated with me in what you were saying. And then this last question about where are you ready to experiment? And I like how that's left open, because I think that's a great popcorn again. Like, oh, maybe I'll experiment in the way that I dress tomorrow, or in the way that I show up in this space, or in a different way of doing my coffee in the morning. Or I'm starting to think of all these things right now that are like related to school, I guess. So I guess that's how I'm ready to experiment, like with the shifts. But also, where am I ready to experiment on deeper levels? Getting back to maybe joining other groups or doing more spiritual work or, whatever it may be. I need to sit with this as I'm talking aloud right now and really write out some of my ideas on where I am ready to experiment on something a little bit different. And it's interesting that it can feel so hard too, because it's like, oh, I know tomorrow I probably won't do my coffee differently. I probably won't dress differently, all those things. But maybe that's a sign that I need to dig deeper into this prompt and really think and feel into what I myself am ready to experiment with that might be just a little bit different and a little bit more bold. And I think it's an important question for me right now with my own mental health because I'd say the past week, I've definitely noticed shifts within my physiological system that have made things a little bit more challenging, whether that's to stay focused or to get work done or whatever it is. And it could just be something as simple as the changing of the seasons right now and how it's getting darker much sooner. But it's also something that I am hyper vigilant of, given my own challenges in this area. And so I think that is something also to experiment with as well, because some of the things that I have relied on for the past however many 10 years, they're not necessarily the most effective now. And so what are some really small, simple adjustments I could take to experiment with things a little bit differently? And we did a really cool activity with the Longmont Grief Collective. And this made me think of this right here. So that's why I'm sharing about it right here. At our meeting this past week, one of the women who is in the group, who is with a counseling center here in town, guided us through an activity where we put both of our hands on paper and trace them. And one represented what we're letting go of and what we're holding on to. And then outside of them, like what's outside of our control and what's within our control. And really just trying to get both of the cognitive brain dump of what we can hold on to and what we can let go of, but also that somatic experience of actually putting our hands there and laying our hands out and almost like talking through our hands. So I think that was a really cool example of, if somebody is asking this question, where are they ready to experiment? That hand exercise, maybe it's about understanding, what am I holding on to? What do I want to let go of? And going from there. Maybe it's about, how do I want to show up in the world and how do I want to have adventure in my life? It's about holding multiple things at once. And I think that is courage, holding multiple things at once. I think that's trying something a little bit different, and it can lead to some really cool experimenting.
Yeah, there's so much there. I love that you started out with small things that you could do and then going deeper. It really made me think about how important it is when we're trying different things to give ourselves permission to try little things. Sometimes it helps us to do little things. And that goes back to quiet, playful, and sacred, and giving yourself the time and space to experiment with things that seem doable and creating opportunities for little victories. That way you can build your confidence and then build to bigger things. And that's somewhat like how you were bringing up, Eryn, about coffee and different things that you could do differently. And then shifting from there to deeper things like with your mental health and seeing things that no longer serve you and maybe finding ways to do things differently. So I like how organic that process was for you as you were talking about small things like with the morning coffee. And then from there, going into deeper things such as looking at ways that you have navigated, mental health, and then how, after 10 years, you're seeing things that no longer serve. So you're thinking about alternative ways of doing that. And that brings me to the the part where it talks about the edge of your familiar rhythm. I want to read that again. So feel into the edge of your familiar rhythm, what calls to you from just beyond it. So that's what I was observing as you were talking, that the edge calling for new, the edge calling for, hey, this isn't really serving you anymore. How can we come up with something that does? And then going to a new experience that you had in your grief collective, which it's a resource for you to pull from experiences that you've had that are new, where you're getting new ways of talking about letting go, talking about, or even acknowledging or noticing when you're holding on maybe too tightly. And that activity that you did with the grief collective came up when you were talking about new ways or alternative ways of looking at things. So doing things differently. And I really like how that all shaped up in what you were saying. And to our listeners, I feel things that we're doing that are new, we may not be aware of how those new experiences, whether they feel connected or not, can help us build new ways of doing things or experiment. Going back to that question, where are you ready to experiment? Why not look at something that you did that was new and how that felt, how it was different from your familiar routine, and where the edges of your familiar rhythm and that new activity meet. And where can you learn from that, and how can you expand from that? So that's something that is coming up for me with this question, where are you ready to experiment? I love that question, because experiment is trying new things. It's seeing if something works or if it doesn't. And there's playfulness there that comes back to quiet, playful, and sacred. And it requires courage to venture out of your comfort zone and explore new ways of being and explore new ways of doing things. So that's something that this prompt has brought up for me. The idea of starting small, as you did in what you said, Eryn, just trying different things, like different ways of making your morning coffee, or different, maybe a different path to walk or run if you do that in the morning, or maybe even being silent when you normally say something or you're normally vocal. So there's many ways that we can ask ourselves, we can see where we want to do things differently. Where do we want to be bold, and where do we want to try something new in a way that's maybe a little uncomfortable, not too uncomfortable that it's kind of daunting, but something that we could do like differently. Yeah, just try something different and see where it takes you. And I also encourage our listeners, and it's almost like I'm going into the call to action too, aren't I? It's a kind of a call to action in a way, to encourage our listeners to take a moment when you do something new, take a moment to observe, to notice what's happening. So rather than do something new and just do it, take a moment to see, how does your body feel? What are some of the thoughts that are coming up? What does it feel like to be uncomfortable? Take that moment to observe yourself doing something new and see where you can put in some quiet, playful, sacred space in that moment of observing. I guess that's my call to action, Eryn.
I like it. The quiet space of observing is definitely one that I think would be a little bit new for me in different ways. So that might be a one. I might follow up on your call to action. And then I guess for my call to action, I don't know. Okay, I'm going to take a step back here. So my call to action is When you read this prompt for the first time, what comes up for you first and right away, and journal on that, whatever's coming up. And then revisit that journal response later in the day or the next day, but pretty recently from when you first responded, and add to it and update it to really get to that depth of really how you feel and think in response to this prompt. That's a good way to kind of move into the final section of the journal then.
Thanks for joining us for Coaching as Benevolence. I'm LaShawn with Mayshell's Sage Place, Positive Intelligence Coaching.
And I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings, Grief and Loss Coaching.
Have a benevolent day.